The flight felt like an eternity. It seemed like the plane would never land, and throughout the journey I watched as Josh grew more and more tense with every passing hour. Maybe it was just me, or maybe it was the weight we both carried, the silence, the unspoken words. It all started long before this vacation, but I had hoped that here in the tropics with just the two of us, we could find our way back to each other. The island looked like something out of an advertisement. White sand, turquoise water, and a luxury resort with private beaches. Josh had chosen it specifically so we could have time to rebuild our relationship. He was really trying, but something in me was broken, and I didn't know how to fix it. Ryan was with us. I don't even remember how he ended up joining this trip, but I guess Josh thought his presence would make things easier. After all, Ryan was his stepbrother and he always knew how to lighten the mood. But this time, I felt like his presence only made things worse. I didn't know why. Maybe I just wanted it to be Josh and me, alone, if only for a little while. When we arrived at the hotel, they gave us a private villa with a pool and a view of the ocean. Ryan made a cheerful comment about how fancy everything looked, but I barely heard him. All I could feel was the tension between Josh and me, which seemed to grow with every step. "You need to relax a little," Josh said quietly after we left our things in the room. I nodded and forced a smile, but it was as empty as my attempts to change anything. All I could think was how we had come to this island not to fix things, but just to escape them. We were having dinner on the open terrace of the restaurant, and the ocean lazily rolled its waves below, creating a rhythm that felt hypnotic. The air was warm, almost heavy with humidity, and I, despite everything, tried to relax, to enjoy the moment. But Josh, as usual, was preoccupied with something else. He was on his phone again, taking business calls, discussing something in a low voice, averting his gaze and missing every opportunity for us to reconnect. "Sorry, it'll be quick," he said, and I just nodded, as if it made any difference. That left Ryan and me alone, and in that moment something shifted. He was polite and calm as always, but I felt something strange. His gaze on me was different. There was nothing overt, but suddenly, I found myself noticing every little detail, how his fingers slowly brushed against the wine glass, how he leaned in just slightly when he spoke softly, words only I could hear. "Is he always this busy?" Ryan asked, nodding toward Josh. "More and more," I replied, trying not to meet his eyes. It felt like a warning signal. Something felt off, like my thoughts had suddenly turned dangerous. But he kept talking, mentioning small things, how much he liked the island, how it had been a while since he'd taken a vacation. I smiled, but my mind wasn't there. I noticed how his voice started resonating in my head differently than before, as if every sentence he said triggered something in me, something unwanted, something forbidden. "You look tired," he said unexpectedly, and his words hung in the air, making me flinch. It was a moment I couldn't ignore. I quickly dropped my eyes to my plate and felt the heat rising to my cheeks. Why? It's just Ryan, my stepbrother. It's ridiculous, but the fact remained. I felt something I wasn't supposed to. Josh returned to the table as if nothing had happened, and I suddenly realized I had been holding myself on edge all evening, not fully understanding what had been bothering me. But now, it was clear. Something inside me had shifted, and it had everything to do with Ryan. After dinner, we decided to take a walk along the beach. Josh immediately buried himself in his phone again, and soon disappeared somewhere in search of a better signal, leaving Ryan and me alone. The evening was warm, the wind gently blowing in from the ocean, and the sunset had painted the sky in deep shades of pink and orange. Everything around was so beautiful and peaceful that, for a moment, I forgot how much my own thoughts were tormenting me. "I've always loved evening walks," Ryan said as we walked along the damp sand. His voice was soft, but suddenly I felt that our conversation had become more personal than before. I glanced at him, and that strange feeling I had been trying to ignore returned. "It really is beautiful here," I replied. But my thoughts were already elsewhere. We found ourselves on a secluded part of the beach with no one around, just the sound of the waves and the rhythm of our footsteps on the sand. "Do you often feel lonely?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. I stopped, pressing my lips together slightly, trying not to reveal the turmoil inside. What do you mean? I tried to deflect the question, though I knew he had touched on something real. It's just, you seem thoughtful lately, he said, stopping beside me. His gaze was attentive, almost too attentive, and I felt my heart begin to race. I stayed silent for a few moments, considering whether I should open up. But in that moment, amidst the calm of the evening and his closeness, I felt like I could say more than usual. Sometimes, I admitted at last, lowering my eyes. But doesn't everyone have moments like that? He nodded, still not looking away from me. And suddenly, this conversation felt dangerous. I knew this might be the moment we should stop, pull back, but I couldn't. Sometimes it feels like you understand me better than Josh. My words came out more sincere than I had intended. I hadn't planned on saying it, but once I did, I felt relieved. It was true. Ryan was quiet for a moment, then stepped closer. The tension in the air was palpable, and I knew this wasn't just a friendly conversation anymore. I feel something similar, he said softly. And in that moment, I realized that I was truly drawn to him. The realization washed over me completely. The evening was perfect. A warm breeze, the pool lit by soft light, and dinner under the stars. Everything should have been relaxing and pleasant, but I felt completely out of place. Everything seemed wrong, especially after my walk with Ryan along the beach. Since then, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I kept catching myself replaying moments when he looked at me so attentively, like no one else ever had. Josh sat across from me, as usual, absorbed in his phone, staring at the screen. We ate in silence, exchanging only small, meaningless phrases. It felt like every conversation we had now was a cover for all the things left unsaid. Ryan sat next to me, and I could feel his presence without even looking at him. It seemed like every gesture, every glance he made was controlled by some hidden tension between us. I knew it was wrong, but the feeling was stronger than I was. When Josh finally put his phone down and joined the conversation, I realized that Ryan and I had become more animated, maybe too animated. We laughed at something insignificant, and at that moment I accidentally touched his hand as I reached for my wine glass. A brief moment, but I realized it wasn't just an accidental touch. It was too long, too noticeable. Josh looked at us, his gaze lingering with a strange intensity. In that instant, something inside me tightened. This was the first moment of suspicion, the moment I realized he was starting to notice. Josh's eyes stayed on my hand longer than they should have, and I quickly pulled it away. "Is everything okay?" Josh asked, clearly sensing something strange in my behavior. "Yes, of course." I tried to smile, but it felt forced, insincere. Ryan said nothing, but his silence only made the tension worse. I sat there, feeling the sweat prickling on my forehead and my heart racing too fast. In that moment, I knew this was just the beginning. Josh was starting to suspect, and I was terrified to think where this might lead. When Josh said he had to urgently return to the mainland for work, I felt a strange sense of relief. I shouldn't have, but that was the reality. I saw how his face remained tense, even though he tried to seem calm. Maybe he suspected something about my feelings. Or maybe it was just the work that had always taken up too much space in his life. Either way, his departure left Ryan and me alone. We stood in the hotel lobby, and I watched as he gathered his things, arranging everything over the phone, preparing to leave. Ryan stood nearby, not saying much, but his presence felt sharper than ever. I tried not to look at him too long, but every time my eyes landed on his figure, something inside me stirred. "It's only for a couple of days," Josh said as he approached me with his suitcase in hand. His voice was calm, but I heard something more, a hidden worry. Maybe he didn't fully trust me, or maybe he didn't trust Ryan. "Don't worry, we'll be fine," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual. But inside, a storm was brewing. I knew that his departure opened the door to something unknown, and though I should resist, with each passing day my feelings for Ryan were becoming harder to ignore. Josh looked at the two of us, and for a moment, I saw something in his eyes that made me tense. Perhaps it was suspicion, or maybe jealousy. But he said nothing. He just stepped back and, hugging me, said, "I'll be back soon." His words were casual, but the tone was sharp. I nodded, and he turned to Ryan. "Look after Lily." Those words sounded more like an order, and that was the moment I realized Josh wasn't leaving for work without a reason. He already suspected something. Perhaps he had planned more than just a business trip. There was a hidden resolve in his gaze, as if everything had already been set in motion. When he left, silence filled the lobby. I turned to Ryan, but I couldn't find any words. All I felt was how Josh's absence was now replaced by his stepbrother. We were alone on this island, and I didn't know what scared me more, the sense of freedom or the guilt that was inevitably coming. When Josh left, I thought I would have some relative peace on the island, but his last goodbye kept haunting me. The words, "look after Lily," had sounded too insistent, as if there was something more behind them. At the time, I didn't realize just how deep his suspicions ran. What happened next, I didn't know at first. Josh had left the island, but his presence lingered. He was far away, yet still in control. When I found out the truth, it hit me like a punch. One day, I stepped out onto the terrace of our room and noticed the maid, a young woman with a serious expression, slipping through the door. She said nothing, only gave a polite nod and disappeared. I thought nothing of it, but later I realized her presence was anything but accidental. At the same time, somewhere in the hidden corridors of the hotel, something significant was happening. Josh, distrustful and clearly suspecting the worst, decided to act differently. He didn't call me or confront me directly. Instead, he hired the maid. Meeting with her in a small service room, Josh offered her a deal: to keep an eye on me and report anything suspicious that might confirm his fears. "You'll just watch. I need to know if something happens," Josh said, his voice quiet but firm. The maid nodded. For her, this was just business. She didn't need to know the details. Work was work, and she would be well paid for it. Her task was simple: observe, listen, report, and I knew nothing of this. Every step she took was now directed toward exposing me. Josh understood he couldn't control me directly, but the maid could be his eyes and ears. She knew where I was, she cleaned our rooms, she could appear at any moment, unnoticed by me. Her presence became part of his plan. I still didn't know about this plot, but I already felt that something had changed. Perhaps it was that instinct, the warning that something was off. But it wouldn't be long before I discovered the maid had been watching me since the moment Josh left. The evening was unusually warm even for this tropical island. The air was thick with the scent of flowers, and a light breeze stirred the palm leaves surrounding the pool, creating a sense of isolation. Candles flickered around us, their reflections dancing on the water, and I felt as though we were in another world, far removed from reality. Josh was far away, and his absence felt almost tangible, but not as tangible as Ryan's presence. Ryan and I sat by the pool, and the tension between us, the one that had been building since the first day, hung heavy in the air. Words were unnecessary. Everything that was happening could be read in our gazes, in our movements. I couldn't quite understand how we had come to this moment, but every second spent with him pushed me toward the inevitable. "You look different tonight," Ryan said softly, breaking the silence. His voice was low, calm, but there was a hidden intensity in it. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Different?" I repeated, not entirely sure what he meant, but already having an idea. He leaned closer, and suddenly I realized my heart was pounding in my chest with unbearable force. It felt like time had stopped. The candlelight flickered on his face, and for the first time I realized how intensely I was drawn to him. This moment had been inevitable, and all my attempts to resist had melted away like the wax of the candles around us. "Lily," he said my name in a way no one else ever had. I closed my eyes because I couldn't bear to look at him any longer, afraid of what I might see, or what I might do. But it happened on its own. His hand brushed against mine. A light touch, but enough to make my defenses crumble. Everything between us finally broke free. I couldn't stop myself, no matter how hard I tried. In the next second, our lips met. That kiss was forbidden, but it was the sweetest thing I had ever felt. The water in the pool gently lapped beside us, and around us there was only the night sky and the tropical darkness. No one could see us. No one could interrupt this moment. I felt his arm wrap around me, and all my doubts vanished. For a moment we pulled away from each other, but our eyes said more than any words could. I sat on the terrace of our room, watching the sunset slowly fade. The colors of the sky shifted from pink to violet, but I barely noticed them. My mind was consumed by the turmoil raging inside me. After that kiss with Ryan, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had spiraled out of control. It all started as an innocent attraction, light flirtation that I thought was harmless. But now I realized that was a lie I had been telling myself. Our kiss was too real, too emotional, and I couldn't erase it from my mind, no matter how hard I tried. In every thought, in every movement, I felt his presence. But with that feeling came guilt. It was heavy, like a stone settled deep in my heart. I couldn't stop thinking about Josh, about what I had done, about how he trusted me, how he believed this vacation would help us reconnect. Instead, I had betrayed him in the cruelest way possible. I tried to convince myself that it was a moment of weakness, a mistake that could be forgotten. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that it wasn't a mistake. It was something more. I stared out at the horizon, but all my thoughts were of Ryan. Remembering that moment by the pool, I could still feel his touch, his gaze. I knew that now, being around him, I wouldn't be able to hide my feelings. They were growing stronger with each passing day, as if they had only been waiting for the right moment to break free. But I couldn't let myself feel this way. I had to suppress these feelings, for Josh, for our life, for everything I had built over the years. But with every attempt to bury them inside, the conflict within me grew stronger. I felt like I was being torn between two worlds, the world of duty to Josh and the world where my desire for Ryan lived. With each minute I spent on that terrace, I realized that trying to suppress my feelings was useless. They wouldn't disappear, no matter how hard I tried. They were already a part of me. Night had fallen on the island, wrapping everything in a soft silence. I stood by the window, looking out at the calm sea. Josh was gone. He had left for a few days, leaving Ryan and me alone in this tropical paradise. The only sound outside was the gentle crashing of the waves, and I felt the weight of the night settle in, knowing it would change everything. When Ryan walked into the room, I already knew what was about to happen. Everything that had held us back until now had disappeared. I could no longer fight my feelings, no longer ignore the pull that drew me to him. Our eyes met, and in that silence there was more than 1,000 words could ever say. He moved closer, and I felt his warmth even before he touched me. Everything happened slowly, as if time had slowed down, and every second stretched out infinitely. His hand slid over my shoulder and I closed my eyes, feeling every touch like a spark that ignited inside me. "Lily," he whispered, his voice barely audible, but it reached the deepest parts of my soul. I didn't respond. In that moment, words were unnecessary. I just let myself be in the moment, allowed my emotions to wash over me. When his lips met mine, I knew there was no turning back. Everything that was happening was inevitable. We spent the night together, and every moment was filled with a passion I could no longer resist. His hands explored my body, and mine did the same to his. We were one in this silent dance, where there was no room for doubts or regrets. Only the quiet of the night and the distant sound of the ocean accompanied us. I felt our bodies merge into one, every cell in my being responding to his touch. I could no longer hide what I felt, no longer deny the truth that was now as clear as day. I was connected to him more deeply than to anyone else. This night was ours, our secret, our passion, our moment that no one could take away. But I knew that with its end would come the morning, and with it, the consequences I had so feared. The night seemed endless. All of our passion, our secret desires seemed to merge in the sounds of that warm night. I wasn't thinking about anything but Ryan, about this moment where the world outside the room didn't exist. But outside the bedroom door, reality was still in motion. The maid, the one Josh had hired to watch me, silently walked down the corridor. Her night shift was almost over, but she paused as she passed by our door. At first, she paid no attention, but soon she heard sounds that made her stop in her tracks. They were strange sounds, quiet moans, interrupted by heavy breathing. She knew that Lily was supposed to be alone, that her husband Josh had left for a few days. But now, hearing these sounds, she realized something was definitely wrong. Her professional ethics told her not to interfere, but the deal with Josh obligated her to report anything suspicious. She stood there for a few moments, listening to the sounds that only confirmed her worst suspicions. Something inappropriate was happening inside the room, and now she had proof. Quickly, she pulled out her phone and began typing a message. Her fingers moved swiftly, almost automatically, as if she had been preparing for this moment for some time. "Mr. Josh, I need to report something important. I heard strange noises coming from your wife's room. I think it's urgent." Her message was short but clear. She knew Josh would read it immediately, and this could change everything. After sending the message, she didn't return to her duties right away. She stood by the door for a few more seconds as if waiting for confirmation that her suspicions were correct. The silence of the corridor sharply contrasted with what was happening inside the room. Her heart pounded because she knew this wasn't just work. This was a step toward uncovering something far greater than a simple infidelity. Now it was in Josh's hands. The airport was small, typical for an island, with palm trees lining the runways and the warm, humid air wrapping around everything. Josh stepped off the plane with a feeling that was hard to describe, a mix of anger, jealousy, and confusion. His phone was still in his pocket, but the last messages from the maid haunted him. The sounds she had described left no room for doubt. He tried to convince himself that maybe it was just a mistake, that things weren't as they seemed. But his heart didn't believe it. The sense of betrayal was growing inside him like a poison, slowly but surely poisoning his thoughts. He knew he had to return. This vacation, which he had planned to mend their relationship, had now turned into a nightmare. Lily, his wife, his partner, was betraying him. And if it was true, she was doing it with his stepbrother. He almost ran through the airport, not noticing the smiles and greetings of the staff. His mind was focused on only one thing. Soon he would see everything with his own eyes. This wasn't just jealousy. It was something deeper, something darker. Josh had always thought of himself as someone who controlled his life, his emotions. But now that control was slipping away. When his driver pulled up to the car, Josh didn't hesitate. "Take me to the hotel," he said curtly, and the car pulled away. On the drive, he stared out the window but didn't see the scenery. The palm trees, the ocean, the sunset. It was all just a backdrop to his rage. He wanted it to be a lie. But deep down, he knew he wouldn't be able to forgive if it was true. The car was silent except for his heavy breathing. Josh tried to control himself, but his thoughts kept circling back to the same question. How could she, with Ryan? That kiss, those sounds, everything the maid had described confirmed his worst fears, and he couldn't believe this was happening to him. When they arrived at the hotel, the sun had almost set, leaving a warm orange glow on the horizon. But inside Josh, there was no warmth, only the cold of betrayal. He stepped out of the car and headed straight for the elevator, moving with purpose, not hesitating for a second. He knew he had to find out the truth, no matter what it was. The warm night enveloped the island, and I sat on the lounge chair by the pool, enjoying the solitude. The reflections from the water danced on my skin, and I felt too relaxed, as if all my worries had disappeared in this moment. Ryan sat next to me, and that invisible connection between us resurfaced, a bond I could no longer ignore. We were alone, under the starry sky, and nothing stood between us now. It was a strange feeling, being with him and simultaneously realizing the depth of what was happening. Everything felt too real, and I understood that with each moment like this, I was losing more of myself. Ryan reached out, his hand brushing against mine, and that touch once again made my heart race. It was the edge, beyond which there was no room for doubts or regrets. I knew this moment had been inevitable. Everything between us had finally found its expression. His lips were so close, I could feel his breath. I couldn't resist, and leaning closer, I felt his kiss. That kiss was like a confession, a full stop to all the doubts that had haunted me. In that moment, I forgot about everything. About Josh, about the consequences, about reality. There was only Ryan and our desire. But that moment was too short. When I heard footsteps approaching, I didn't immediately realize who it was. It took a second for me to turn and see Josh. He stood there, unmoving, his expression breaking my heart. His eyes were fixed on what had just happened, the kiss he had witnessed with his own eyes. Time stood still. None of us said a word. I saw his expression shift from shock to fury. This was the moment when my worst fears became reality. "Lily?" Josh said my name, his voice filled with pain but also with icy rage. I couldn't find the words to explain or justify myself. In that moment, I knew that everything I had feared losing was now truly lost. Ryan said nothing, his face tense, realizing there was no going back. Late evening had fully consumed the island. The darkness and silence, which normally brought peace, only amplified the tension that unfolded by the pool. Josh hadn't gone far. He stood nearby, his figure barely visible in the dim light, but I could see how his shoulders were tense, how his hands were clenched into fists. I knew he couldn't just walk away. This was the moment when everything was about to explode. "You betrayed me." His voice cut through the silence. It was low, but the fury in it simmered deep beneath the surface. I couldn't help but flinch. These weren't just words. It was a sentence I had already known was coming. "Josh, please let me explain." I took a step toward him, desperately hoping there was still a sliver of a chance he would listen. But this wasn't the Josh I knew anymore. His eyes had no room for understanding or forgiveness. "Explain?" He laughed, but there was no joy in it. "What could you possibly explain, Lily? I saw it all with my own eyes. How can you justify this?" I opened my mouth again, searching for something to say, but the words caught in my throat. Everything I could offer seemed insufficient, pathetic in comparison to what had happened. 1,000 thoughts swirled in my mind, but none of them could help me now. Ryan stood off to the side, tense and silent. He didn't try to intervene, as if he understood this wasn't his fight. This was our moment, the moment where my life was crumbling. "You were my wife," Josh continued, stepping closer. His voice trembled with rage. "I trusted you. I thought we could fix this, that this vacation would help us. And you chose my brother." "It's not that simple," I tried, feeling tears well up in my eyes, but Josh wasn't interested in hearing anything. "Not that simple?" His face was now close to mine. "This is betrayal, Lily. How could you? You've destroyed everything we had. For what?" I didn't know what to say. Any answer I gave would only deepen his pain, and I knew it. But staying silent was unbearable. "I can't forgive you," he said quietly, but his words hit me like a blow. They were more than just anger. This was final. And in that moment, I realized that all bridges had been burned. "Josh, please." Tears were now streaming down my cheeks, but he didn't react. He turned away and took a step back. "It's over between us." His voice was cold, like the icy wind that blew across the water. "I don't need you anymore." With those words, he walked away, leaving me standing by the pool, alone in the night, surrounded by broken hopes. I sat by the pool, quietly watching as Josh walked away. His steps were determined, and he didn't look back. In the silence of the warm night, all I could hear was the sound of the water and my own heavy breathing. My world, the one I had tried so hard to hold together, had fallen apart. I watched his figure disappear around the corner, and I knew he wasn't coming back. He wasn't just leaving. He was erasing me from his life. In his eyes, I no longer existed. I was nothing but pain, betrayal, a mistake he would never be able to forgive. It was over. Ryan sat down beside me. I could feel his presence, but it no longer brought the warmth it once had. Instead, his closeness only deepened the pain. We sat in silence, and I didn't know what to say. Words had lost their meaning. "Lily," Ryan finally said, his voice soft, almost uncertain. I looked at him, but there was no passion in my gaze anymore. Now I saw everything differently. Our actions, our decisions had destroyed too much. We had gone too far, and in the end, we were left with nothing. "We can't go on like this," I said quietly, my words hanging in the air like something final. "From now on, we're only brother and sister, nothing more." Ryan remained silent, but I could see he understood. It was the only way to salvage what little remained after everything that had happened. If we continued, we would destroy not just ourselves, but everything around us. "You're right," he finally said. His face was more serious than I had ever seen it. "We've destroyed too much." I nodded, feeling the tears begin to roll down my cheeks. I didn't hold them back anymore. This night was the end of everything that had mattered to me. Josh was gone, and with him went the future I had once envisioned. I had lost not just my husband, but myself. Ryan and I were left alone, but I knew even his presence couldn't fill the emptiness inside me. We both realized our past had been a mistake. Now, all that lay ahead was a void, and I would have to learn to live with it. I stayed by the pool, listening to the gentle splash of the water. The world around me continued to move, but inside, everything had stopped. Ryan quietly stood up and left, leaving me alone. He knew that I needed to be by myself with my thoughts. The night was warm, but it felt like a cold had settled inside me that would never go away.